Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to my Ocarina of Time any% tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at Wrong Warp in part 6 of my series of videos. So if you haven't checked out the other ones, make sure to check them down. There should be a little playlist on the side, or annotations at the end of the video, etc, etc. So, Wrong Warp is a really intimidating trick, I feel, for a lot of new players. I know myself was like, thinking, how am I ever going to learn this? This is just totally bizarre. How does this even work? And I think that's kind of like not true. It's actually not too hard, and not too hard to get consistent. The only thing I would say is I do recommend you learn this trick on emulator because, say for example, I am practicing Ocarina items and I mess up and go too far in the warp and fail there. I have to make it all the way back to the Deku Tree to do this, and if, you know, it's just such a hard thing to practice on console when you're a beginner. I mean, learn on console. I think you could practice on console a lot more effectively, but like as a beginner, I strongly recommend you learn this with an emulator. Otherwise, you're going to have a ton of trouble. Anyway, from here, the first thing you need to know about Wrong Warp before we get into setups and explanations is you need to know how to do Ocarina items. So all you do to do Ocarina items is you drop stuff out of your bottle. It could be bugs, fish, fairies, whatever, and you pick it right back up. And now that you're holding out your bottle, so you don't want to like press B or something to slash your sword. Like if I pressed B and I did this stuff like so, it looked like nothing would happen. You have to have the bottle in your hand. So then you backflip and press whatever button you've assigned bottle to, so in my case left, C, and then sword, like so, really quickly. So if you can see my little inputs on screen, my Y and B, because Y is my C, like, there you go. You could also do your Deku stick, and you could do, you know, a slingshot or boomerang, or your Master Sword, or anything, as long as you're kind of interrupting it. I don't think Deku Nuts work. I've actually never tried. Yeah, for some reason I don't think Deku Nuts kind of are the same type of item, so they don't work. But anything that you can kind of hold works. So that's how you do Ocarina items. From here, I want to explain how Wrong Warp works, and not in terms of advanced stuff like memory addresses and temporary flags and crap like that. Just how the trick works and how your actions affect that trick. And I personally feel this will be really useful for beginner players learning kind of how to do the trick and finding out where their mistakes are. But if you already know a bit about the trick, or you just want to learn the setups and kind of don't want the technical stuff, I have annotations below here that you can kind of just skip ahead to the different setups. But I really strongly recommend you watch this section. So check this out if you want more information on Wrong Warp and how it works. Alright, here it goes. Alright guys, if you're watching this, that means that you want to learn more about how Wrong Warp works, and I commend you because that's the smart decision. You'll get the trick way more consistently if you know what's going on. So I already started the save state here, but basically I've got the emulator paused. When you're doing Ocarina items on this warp, on the edge of the warp, I think this is pretty obvious, but stopping Link from being carried up into the air and into the Deku Tree cutscene. So you'll notice here, let me hit this. Link is no longer being propelled into the air and about to talk to the Deku Tree. And if I keep holding this, like, Link will not do that until I press B. So, when I press B, a timer will start. And for explanation's sake, let's say there's a timer that counts to 100, alright? So this timer is, as soon as I let go of B, it's counting all the way to 100, and once it hits 100, Link is kind of pulled up into the air. So, to illustrate the existence of the timer, I have a physical timer on my webcam in front of me, so pressing B right now, I'm out of the warp. The warp is kind of pulling me up, and right as it pulls me up, I'll hit the kind of time. So around 5.5 seconds. The 5.5 seconds thing doesn't matter at all, really, but the point is there's a timer that is specific every single time, won't change, that'll pull you up. So the second big thing to know is that when you go over this little hump or bump or whatever you want to call it, this area is now, the timer has stopped loading. So remember that timer that was counting all the way up to 100? It's not counting anymore because the N64 kind of, or whatever system you're using, chooses not to load that area because it doesn't have enough memory. So it's like, well, we're not prioritizing that anymore. The important part is this area here. Which, remember that timer I hit on before, like with the 5 seconds? Now, to illustrate this, that timer could count to like 100 and it still would not be carrying me away. Remember, it's long past 5.5 seconds. So, to do the Wrong Warp trick, you want to be entering the door here on a specific frame. The trick is a frame-perfect trick, meaning one frame before you fail, one frame after you fail. So imagine if, say, using this the timer to 100 example, you say want to get through the door on frame 90, which means you want to pass from the moment you press B to the moment you make it over the hump. You want to be on frame 90 out of 100, so that when you enter this door, you're going to end up in Ganon's castle, like so. So how do you do that? Well, if you couldn't already guess, you want to waste those 90 frames along the way, so that you make sure that you're kind of you make sure that you've passed the time and that you're on that frame. And there's ways to kind of waste frames, basically, and there's several ways, and that's actually why there's so many varieties and setups, is because all you're really doing, imagine if I kind of told you, I want you to kind of cross like this line in 5 seconds. I don't care how you do that, like you could freaking, you know, flip a bunch of times, but as long as you're past here right at 5 seconds, you're good. Anything less or before, not good. That's what Wrong Warp is doing. You're just kind of passing time and however much you want to on it, and then getting over that bump on a specific kind of time set. And that's what all those different setups are. So again, sort of using this timer to illustrate stuff, like say the Deku Nut. You'll see this a lot in different setups. Like the Deku Nut uses some time. I'm gonna press the timer right as I throw it, and then right as the animation seems to stop. So like around half a second is used by the Deku Nut. What would happen if I were to freaking like drop a ton of Deku Nuts, like so? Well, eventually I'd probably get taken away. So you can see that like each input I'm doing matters and wastes time. So like when I do a setup like this, those sword slashes, those side hops, that kind of side walk, everything is advancing time so that I enter this door at a specific time, if that makes sense. So because of that, it doesn't matter where you're doing those kind of time wasters, it just matters that you're doing them to a point. With Deku Nuts, the reason they're used often is because they kind of make you fall right, like they stop you right in place. So for a lot of setups, they're good because like once you fire a Deku Nut, like Link stops. But for example, you just saw me do the kind of stick slashes fairly late in that kind of little Wrong Warp attempt. But let's say I do them like right here, and I keep walking all the rest of the way. I pass the hump, the timer stops loading, enter this door. It still worked because I'm wasting the time. So like you could almost think of it as like, you know, me doing this in like just wasted half a second, wasting time, quarter of a second, and I'm over. Like, and it's those little kind of additional inputs that you've done that work it. Like, that's why a different setup like this, I'm not as consistent with some of them, so bear with me, but a different setup like this, where you're side hopping and slashing, like, the side hop is there because maybe the slashes take longer, or maybe kind of stuff like, it's all adjusting so that you can get this to work. See, I was a bit early. So this kind of is still useful to me because if you're a frame early or several frames early, this is what the screen will look like. When you exit that door, it's going to be just kind of normal game. If you're late, you enter the Deku Tree cutscene. So that's kind of how you can know. And because of that, if you mess up your setup, you can just like side hop and like crazy, and then enter early because you've basically like say, you know, we're passing a set amount of time, you're like, screw that, I messed up, I know I'm not going to pass the right amount of time with my setup, let's side hop and get there several seconds early, and that way I can go, turn around, and try the trick again. So now we know, timer starts, set amount of movements go around here, and then stop loading after you've passed that little area, and that's how you're kind of doing the most of the trick, right? So this is how you'd restart if you wanted to. Well, there's one other thing to consider, is what if the movements you're doing don't actually give you the right frame after you've stopped the loading kind of area? Well, then you need to do what are called adjustments, which basically are kind of tiny ways to load the frame, advance the frames just a bit. So say we need to get frame 90 again in our example, and we're at frame 88, we need to advance 2 frames. Again, this is like arbitrary, we're not actually advancing 2 frames, but like we need to figure out a way to advance 2 frames, and like maybe it'll work. So an example of how to do that would be this. Here's an adjustment, for example. you're seeing me target the wall and then turn around, and did you see how that kind of warp showed for just a second? Let's turn around again. The warp showed for just a second. If I keep doing this, I'm advancing frames every time, and eventually this warp is going to pull me away because I've kind of pushed that warp forward and made the counter go all the way back to 100 again, if that makes sense. So for some tricks, adjustments are very, very necessary, like tricks that, especially tricks that start, I'm going to find the save state. So there are some tricks that get set up on this side, and those require adjustments because they need to change sides, which means all the movement they're doing on this side, sorry, let me just get that right, is kind of accommodating for the adjustments they're going to do after. So, you know, this has 2 side ops and a nut slash. That's kind of using a specific amount of time. But then from here, they're targeting, this is a setup that I was going to show you later. You're going to target and turn around. Now I've just advanced a few frames. And if I did the trick right, that kind of advancement has pushed me forward to kind of say the perfect frame 90 in this hypothetical example that allowed me to do the trick. And if I was able to kind of see that I was like on the wrong frame, I could do adjustment in a different way and hope that would fix it up. So this kind of could work. I wasn't really paying too much attention when I did the warp. Yeah, see? So why was that different? Well, like, notice the angle. Here, like, I turn around and I load the entire warp. And here, I like, well, I actually untargeted that. That's important too. Gosh. Okay. Good God, that's even worse. Okay, here, this probably won't work either because I like turned around but I wasn't at the same angle. Like, it's all just kind of advancing frames in really slight ways, but that's kind of what's contributing to the trick. So if I were to let go of Z, like that kind of adjusts things too. So you'll find when I explain these sort of tricks, I might say like that advances a frame afterwards, and you need to be kind of thinking like, okay, so a certain amount of frames were like spent on the way there, and then we were 1 frame away or 2 frames away or whatever, and that little adjustment gave us the frame. So like, you know, to kind of illustrate again, while still being timely, here this is going to work because I did the right movements. But if I let go of Z before I enter the door, okay, wait 1 second. This should not work. Okay, say I let go of Z here, this will for sure not work. That's really weird that that's not working. Z is another like letting go of Z kind of advances you a frame. I'm not really sure why that wasn't working. Maybe if I just need to be farther out. Okay, for some reason it's not working. Normally, like, that's just another example of an adjustment. So I hope this kind of is helpful for you. I might try to kind of put some diagrams and kind of things to make this explained, but basically there's a timer. You started the timer. There's a kind of area where the timer starts and an area where the timer stops. In between there, you want to be doing the same, kind of wasting the same amount of frames or counting, like doing actions that count up to a certain time, however you want to explain it. And as long as you do those actions in the same way, you'll get the trick every time. And that's how we're able to do this consistently. So all the setups you're going to see here are all doing the same thing in different ways. They're just wasting time and advancing frames to hit that 1 frame. So I hope that's helpful in explaining the tricks. And so explaining how the tricks are working. Yeah, keep in mind, doesn't matter where the kind of tricks are for the most, like where the slashes and stuff are, generally, like keep that in mind, or like whatever kind of time-wasting movements there are. What matters is simply that you're wasting that time in a specific way. So, hope that's helpful. On to the actual setups for the tricks. Okay, so now that you've seen how wrong warp works kind of in theory, and you understand how Ocarina items works, I'm just going to show you the first of one of the many setups I'm going to show you on how to do this trick. That's also, I think, the easiest setup. This is known as the MST setup. It's very, very difficult to make mistakes, and because of that, I'd say it's the best for a beginner player to learn. So after you've gotten Ocarina items, you're going to head all the way over to here, and you're going to line up. I'm going to put a little picture, but you're going to be lining up right above you. There's a little kind of texture. We'll just see this like little kind of, it's like a squarey triangle texture in front of you. You're going to line up on that and Z target it, then side hop, roll once more forward, and then backflip, and backflip again and do Ocarina items. And now you've just started the trick and you're ready to do any of the variations and setups. So I'll show you the variations now. Okay, so just before we get started, I just want to reiterate that this is the texture that you're going to be looking at. You can see the arrow pointing to it. It's just a little triangle, and it's not very specific at all. Don't worry too much about it. From there, you're going to side hop left, do a roll, then do another roll, backflip, and tap Ocarina items to pull out the Ocarina. From there, I'm going to slow this down. You're going to hold right, and when the camera kind of pans out like this, you're going to press B, and then take a few steps to the right and drop a decunut so you stay in the one firm place. From there, you're going to hold left and side hop once, and then just keep holding left and until you make your way over this little hump. Now you can tell that Link is facing right against the wall. That proves that this is frame 1. Depending on how many steps you take after you press B right here, that will determine your frame, and it's basically like what position you're going over the warp. So we can tell that this is frame 1 because you'll notice as Link is approaching this wall right here, like he's right up against it, like he barely made it over that thing. He barely didn't get stuck on the cusp of it. So I'm just going to show that again now full speed. So holding R, dropping the decunut, pulling to the left, jump once, make it over the wall, and then from here you're just going to side hop a bunch once you're over the hump and do these adjustments. You're going to Z target the wall, turn around, Z target this wall, turn around, Z target this wall, turn around, and then make your way without letting go of Z into the door. So you do this by holding kind of upright. And then there you go. That is the first way to do wrong warp. Okay, so I made this little diagram to illustrate the different positions you can be in and what frame you're on. The last one I showed you was frame 1, but basically all these are determined by how many steps you take before you drop your decunut. So now I'm going to show you guys frame 2, and I'm going to skip the initial setup because for each of these tricks, the initial setup is the same. Just the variations occurred depending on how many steps you took before your decunut dropped, and then because of that, what frame you end up going over the hump on. So here it is. Okay, so just like before, you're holding right, press B, taking a few steps, dropping a decunut, holding left, jumping once to the left, like a side hop. Then as you make your way over this little hump, you'll notice you're not exactly hugging the wall, you're just a bit forward. That is frame 2. So from there, you can then take a bunch of side hops after you've made your way over the hump. And then here's the adjustment you make. You don't target Z or anything, you just turn around and then hold Z. Then you make your way to the door and you can let go of Z and enter it. And that is the adjustment to do wrong warp successfully on frame 2 with this setup. Okay, so frame 3 starts exactly the same. You hold to the right, drop a decunut, side hop once, keep going, and then as you notice here, you're going to be in the middle like the diagram said, so right in the middle. This is probably my favorite frame. You're going to make your way over. You could side hop like this if you want to, but you want to make your way over to this little brown texture right here. That's how you know where to line up, and then you're just going to walk totally straight, and then turn around and Z target. And then from there you can like side hop over. You want to hold upright to get in the door. It's kind of a little tricky angle because you don't want to let go of Z. That'll mess up the trick. And there you go. That's frame 3. Alright, setup starts same as usual. Take a few steps, drop a decunut, do a side hop. Then over here you can tell you're on frame 4 because you're just over the hump but you're not touching the wall, so you're just past frame 3. From there it's exactly the same as frame 3. You're trying to line up with that little black texture, walking forward and then turning around. And this video kind of proves that that black texture lining up thing isn't too specific. Don't worry about it too much. You just want to get kind of around there. And there you go. That's frame 4. Okay, now to frame 5. This is probably one of my least favorite frames, as it's very unlikely that you get it. You have to take several steps forward in order to get frame 5, and if you took too many steps, you just miss the entry point altogether. So you can tell it's frame 5 by the fact that there's a wall right in front of Link. It's really close to him. Then you want to just line up onto this little texture. I backwalked just to show it to you, but you walk forward, backwalk, and turn around, and then you just make your way into the door as you normally would without letting go of Z. And that's pretty much it. That is the MST setup, so on to the next one. Okay, so the next setup is significantly faster, but also more difficult. And the reason it's faster is because you get to the warp by doing 8 backflips. I would say this is sort of the standard beginner method for any % wrong warp. On the very last backflip, you're going to be doing Ocarina items, so 7 backflips normally, and then the 8th one you're doing Ocarina items, and then you do this setup. Okay, so with this setup, instead of holding right, you're going to be holding down, and you can see my inputs on screen. And then you're going to press B once the kind of camera pans out a bit, and then you're going to drop a decunut after 4 steps. From there, you're going to hold left immediately and side hop twice, and you should be kind of hugging the wall like this. From there, you side hop all the way over, move up, target with Z, turn around, and then hold up right to get into the door. And that's pretty much this setup. I'll go into it in a bit more detail in slow motion now. Okay, so personally, I actually really hate this trick. I never liked this setup, and I could never, even to this day, get it that consistent, but a lot of people find it super easy. The main thing I had trouble with was making sure that I did 4 steps. Some people actually prefer these kind of things, but for me, counting the number of steps was sort of difficult, because if you do 3 steps, you're not going to be able to get into the kind of hump area. If you do 5 steps, the trick won't work. So that's very precise. Other than that, you just want to be making sure that when you're dropping the Deku you immediately are holding left, and spacing out those side hops well. From there, the trick is pretty simple, and if you find that it's easy and you can get it consistent, then this is a good setup for you. So if you haven't noticed it already, all these setups use Deku Nuts, and this can be particularly challenging if you don't have them because you wasted too many during the Goma fight. So an alternative setup that you could use is one found by my friend, It's Justin DT. This is a nutless setup and very similar to the one I just showed you prior. Basically, you're going to do the 8 backflips, and on the 8th one, you're going to do Ocarina items onto the warp, like I showed. I just skipped the 7 backflips to save time, but it's the same as the other one. Then from there, you're going to be holding down and then pressing B to start moving. You're going to take 4 steps just like before, but instead you're going to slash your sword and then target Z and hold left. No side hops or anything. Once you make your way over the little hump, you're then going to hold down and Z target, and then make your way into the door and make sure not to let go of Z. That's the only kind of big important thing with this trick. And there you go. That's a nutless wrong warp setup you can use. Alright, so if you're just having trouble with those other setups, or you just want something that's faster, there is several setups that you can do that start basically like this, where you backwalk for a little while, and then you do 3 backflips into Ocarina items. These setups, however, are significantly more difficult because they require often frame-perfect inputs, and there's a lot more kind of adjustments you have to make based on Link's positioning, so they're definitely not for beginners. But before I get into that, and I'll explain kind of all the different variations, I wanted to just talk about how to speed up a wrong warp, because I think people don't understand, basically, like, if you're good at this game, your wrong warp split will be like the same time basically every time. Like, it may have like a second or 2 fluctuation, but like because of the nature of the trick, it has to be the same amount of time. And what I mean by that is, once you're on the warp, like I said before in the explanation, like, the movement you're doing from here all the way over into this hump, like, is going to take the same amount of time every time, because you need to get on a certain frame. So that means that the movement you're doing after you're over the hump is what you can save time on, and what you did before to get onto the warp, right? So like, after you've killed Goma, you got to think of the fact that, like, you just walked into this room, you got bugs, and you have, like, think about this, for example, right? If you were to do the good setup, like the fastest setup, you just back walk and go like straight onto the warp. I'm actually a bit off to the side, but you're back walking straight onto the warp. That's pretty quick. However, if you were to do the kind of more beginner MST setup, you're walking all the way over here. It's taking like a ton more time. Then you're doing side hops and rolls and stuff, and now you're finally on the warp, so that took you more time. And then to actually do the setup is going to take you a bit more time. Like, okay, this is first frame. See, now that we've gone over the hump, like, we probably spent around the same amount of time on the way there, but we actually have to now do all those, like, adjustments, you know what I mean? Like, we have to go, what is it? I can't even remember. I never do this. We have to do the adjustments to get the MST setup to work, and those adjustments take time. I see, I messed it up. The reason that, like, wrong warp that I showed you before, I'll load a save state so that you can see, like the one that looks like this, where you just back walk, is so much faster, is because it gets on the warp really quickly, and then it has no adjustments whatsoever, so you're walking right into the door. Like, or if it does have adjustments, they're very minor, like they're ones like letting go of Z and stuff, and that way you're able to do it. So I just wanted to explain, like, that's why those methods are faster. It's not like you could find a setup that, like, between the warp and the thing, like, did a bunch of crazy side hops or something that's quicker. Like, that's always going to be the same. So what matters in terms of improving the speed of the wrong warp is just the movement you're doing before the warp and the movement you're doing after that little hump. So adjustments slow you down, and getting onto the warp, running around, like, taking time to get onto the warp slows you down. That's the 2 main things. So now, on to the kind of little variations of this trick. Okay, here you go. Okay, so now that you understand how to improve the speed of your wrong warp and the limitations in improving its speed, the next thing that I think you should understand is even more important when learning these advanced techniques is how Link's warp position affects the trick and kind of the way you do different adjustments and stuff. So basically, I actually have the cursor on here just to show you some stuff, but basically, you'll notice when you do this little setup, the position that Link is in, I'm just gonna really pop it, stop it right here. The position that Link's head is in on the warp is gonna be different each time because of the fact that when you're back walking, it's very difficult for you to consistently do those 3 backflips in the same time every single time. So it's actually very possible for you to have positions like this. This is actually quite an extreme one where Link's hat isn't in the warp at all. Like, I'll just kind of show it again right there. You can see like it's not poking through at all. And then on the opposite side, if you were to kind of at the very last minute still get the kind of position to work, Link's hat could look like this, where it's like basically the entire hat is poking in. You can see right here, you know. Now there's everything in between this. Obviously, there's kind of like hat a bit in and bit not in, but like the point is, this actually kind of changes the trick, and I'm going to explain right now that you've kind of seen the hats, like in this really ghetto diagram I made, and try to explain it to the best of my ability. So here's a diagram. Okay guys, so like I said before, I made this crappy diagram to explain how wrong warp positioning in the warp, like where Link's hat is, makes a difference. If you haven't watched the beginning video that explains how wrong warp works, I strongly recommend you do it because I'm not really going to kind of hold back here. So basically, wrong warp, just to really quickly review, it's doing a set amount of kind of motions so that you stop a timer as soon as you pass this little kind of hump, which I've represented by the black line. That's when the timer stops. So as soon as you get off the warp from here all the way over to there, you need to be, actually I'll just use a brush to kind of illustrate that in a new layer. From here, you know, all the way over, that's like that kind of distance. If you do it the same amount every single time, you'll get a wrong warp because it's a frame perfect trick. Okay, so we all understand that. So from this diagram, you should be able to kind of tell a bit more how variations can occur. Like if you're farther out on the warp, that actually makes you a bit closer to where the hump ends. So meaning that it'll take you less time. So in example 1, you're very far out of the warp, right? That means it'll take you less time to get past the hump, and then thus less frames. So you know, I have a little kind of line over here. So I drew a line from here all the way over to the kind of end of the hump, and that's like, you know, say that's about 10 seconds or whatever it takes, or like that's 5 seconds, like, you know, to kind of use around roughly the time I said before, right? Well, if you were to apply that line over here, sorry, I made these before, that same line, I duplicated it and drag it down. Guess what? There's actually this little gap here because Link is that much farther in the warp, and he still has to go that much further to get past the hump and stop the timer from running. So basically, what I'm trying to say here is that I'm just going to pull these down. Is if you're far out of the warp, you're going to be actually kind of, if you're super far out, you're actually probably going to be 1 frame early from where you need to be when you're going to do the trick. And if you're super far in, it's going to take you 1 frame extra because you're so far in the warp that it actually takes, you know, like an extra step or whatever, 1 frame's worth of movement to cross this line. And you know, so I kind of made lines for everything. Like you can see how this line works for this kind of distance, but it's not the same across each position. You'd think this would be obvious, but a lot of people don't actually seem to understand this. So because of that, you kind of have to accommodate your setups in such a way, like with that in mind, like you're thinking, okay, I'm going to be a frame late because of this setup. Now I need to kind of do an adjustment that'll pull me back a frame. Or, oh no, I'm so far out of the warp that I'm going to be a frame early. I need to advance a frame somehow. And keep that in mind when you're doing the trick the whole way through. So I hope this diagram is helpful. Again, I know it's kind of very noobish and basic. I didn't put a lot of time into it. But you should kind of get the idea that, like, by being farther out the warp because you backflipped really early, it takes you less time to get here than if you backflipped really late. It just takes you a bit more time. So hope that was helpful. Now back to the game. Okay, so I'm going to show you the difference between a frame perfect nut throw and a second frame nut throw. This is the perfect frame or the first frame. So notice how Link's body rotated down and he dropped a Deku Nut. There was no kind of steps he took. Look again. So I'm holding down, I press B, he immediately shifts his body and drops a Deku Net. Now we have this second frame if you miss it. So see how Link's feet just shuffled a bit? Now I'll slow it down real quick here. We're turning around, Link presses B, moves down, and then his feet shuffle a bit as if he's about to take a step. That is one frame late, and it will mess up your trick if you don't get it correctly, depending on how you do the setup. So again, there it was. This is frame 1. This is frame 2 full speed. Frame 1, here it is. Again, I press B, I'm holding down. I immediately drop the Deku Net. There's no shuffling of the feet. Well, as here, if you're going to look at Link's feet, they're going to kind of move a bit just before he drops the Deku Net, right now. Move a bit and then drop the Deku Net. That's frame 2. Frame 1 is over here. Frame 2 is over here. Okay, we're finally ready to show setups, and I'm going to basically break it down into the main setup and then the different kind of variations that you do depending on your frame and if you get perfect nut throws and that type of stuff. The first one I'm going to show you is a setup I made. I really like this one. I find it really is easy and very consistent. You can do this for a swordless route even, or a non-sword route. It doesn't use sword at all, so here it is right now. I'm going to explain it really quickly. Okay, so you're going to backwalk until you get over the hump and do 3 backflips, and then I'm going to ignore the positioning on the warp for now. I'll explain the variations in a bit, but then you're going to be holding down, pressing B and dropping a nut on a frame perfect nut throw. Then you're going to slash your stick twice with a bit of separation in between, make your way over the hump, and enter the door without letting go of Z, and that's the trick. It's pretty simple. Here it is, just a bit slowed down, guys. So again, holding down, dropping a nut on the first frame, holding right and then slashing your stick once and then twice with a little bit of separation in between. When you make your way over the hump, you want to side hop a bunch of times and then enter the door by just holding up and not letting go of Z and tapping A. It's pretty simple. It takes a bit of practice to get the frame perfect nut throws, but this is my preferred method. Okay, so now I'm going to explain some of the variations with that stick wrong warp setup. Basically, the first one is that happens is if you're on the very outer kind of if your hat is barely in the warp, you want to be spacing out your Deku stick slashes very tightly, so with very little space in between, and it'll work like that. If you don't do that, you will be a frame early, and I'll show you. So slash, slash, that's not going to work. They have to be very kind of tight, which I'll show you as I enter the door. So enter the door, I'm going to be a frame early here, like you can see. So it's because I slashed like this, as opposed, with spacing, as opposed to, walking slash slash, like that. That's what you need to be doing to get this trick to work if it's on the outer frame and Link's hat isn't very far in the warp. If it is far in the warp, all the way in, again, like I said before, this is very uncommon. You just want to space out your slashes a lot. This should work. And then the next thing you want to do is you want to Z-target this wall, hold up and Z-target like this, and then let go and enter the door. That actually pulls you back a frame and allows the trick to still work. So spacing out the slashes, because not spacing them out actually wastes a frame, and then doing that adjustment, which does make you lose a bit of time, but that position happens pretty rarely. The only other thing I can think of, there's different kind of positions, but basically if the hat is fairly out, you want to be kind of spacing the slashes a little bit, and if the hat is fairly in, add a bit more, and then only if it's really far out, nothing is touching at all, do you want to have the slashes be pretty immediate, slash slash, not slash pause slash. But yeah, the other thing I wanted to show you is if you miss a frame perfect nut throw, that's the frame perfect one. That might not work because I didn't space them out enough. The trick won't work. So I got the frame perfect nut throw. I did this. However, if you're on the outer edge, Link's hat is barely touching the warp, and you miss the frame perfect nut throw, let me see if I can do it intentionally. It's kind of hard now. Okay, that might not have worked because I didn't hold right. No, that's right again. No, it's hard to purposely make mistakes. That was 2 steps. Okay, what I'm not going to bother showing. It's kind of hard to try to make a mistake, and I don't want to practice getting worse. Basically, if you miss it on the outer frame, this position, that I'll show you right now, you're actually able to just continue doing the trick how you normally would, except don't do the slashes tightly. Space them out a lot, the way you would if your hat was fully in. Basically, your hat being fully in is the same as you missing the frame perfect nut throw. Think of it that way. So if you miss the frame perfect nut throw, just do the same kind of stuff, except you don't have to do the adjustment this time. So it's not totally the same. You don't have to target the wall or whatever. You can just do it the way you normally would if your hat is very far out of the warp. If your hat is fairly inside the warp, you probably will have to do the adjustment. Just saying, that's kind of like how it works. And then if your hat is like, you know, if you're totally in the warp like you were before, and you miss the frame perfect nut throw, it's so hard to miss it. There. And even if you do space them out and you do the adjustments, I'm pretty sure it's going to fail just because there's not much else you can do. But like I said before, this position is very rare. Yeah, see, it failed. So that's the only downside with this trick, and it's a very slim one. You know, the chances of you messing up two things like that is pretty unlikely, and otherwise it's very consistent. So again, spacing of the slashes, if you need to advance a frame, make it tight. If you want to kind of keep the frame, make it sort of normal. And if you're actually a frame forward, you want to do that little adjustment. And that's pretty much it for this setup. Okay, so that concludes this video of my Ocarina of Time Any% tutorial series. The next video will be focusing on Collapse, Ganon, and Void Warp, sorry, not Wrong Warp. Today we focused on Wrong Warp. If there are any setups that I haven't covered, I know I didn't go into a lot of the different mainstream advanced setups. I decided against it just because the video was getting longer and longer, and if you guys want me to cover those, I can cover those in a separate video, but I think this video pretty adequately explains the kind of fundamentals behind Wrong Warp and different setups on kind of different levels, you know, from beginner, medium to hard levels of tricks. So again, I hope you like this video. Make sure to follow me on twitch.tv/MichaelRadar. Hit the subscribe button, you know, favorite this video, like this video, all that stuff just kind of inspires me to do more videos, and I hope you like them. So tune into the next video, and thanks for watching.